It's Thursday, the 22nd of September. My name's Juan Brown. You're watching the Blanco Lirio channel. And back on 17 September, we had yet another midair collision. This time, a Cessna 172 with a student and instructor on board collided with a Sonex Xenos home-built aircraft near Niwot Road in Boulder County, Colorado, near Longmont, Colorado. Here's what we know so far. On board the Cessna 172 was a 22-year-old CFI and a 23-year-old student pilot. On board the Xenos aircraft was a 69-year-old private pilot. And here on Catherine's report, according to flight tracking data, the 172 left Rocky Mountain Metropolitan Airport in Broomfield about 8:43 a.m. and flew north on a training flight. The Sonex Xenos left Platte Valley Air Park in Hudson at about 8:38 a.m. and flew west, officials said. Both aircraft were at about 7,000 feet above sea level. Remember, the terrain in this area is about 5,000 feet, so they're about 2,000 feet above the ground, when the Cessna 172 made a right turn and the flight paths of the two planes merged. Now it says here neither aircraft was in contact with air traffic control and neither aircraft was equipped with a collision avoidance system. Well, they may not have had a proper airline-style TCAS system, but it's apparent from the data that they did have ADS-B data in and out, at least out. Here's the ADS-B data from adsbexchange.com of the Cessna 172 departing Rocky Mountain Airport, heading north to a practice area which has several other airports nearby here in Longmont. And they are practicing some turns at about 7,200 feet. And then they do a right-hand turn descending to about 6,700 feet when the data stops right here on Niwot Road. Here's the ADS-B data from the Sonex aircraft departing Platte Valley Airport heading west at about an altitude of 6,700 feet, approaching Niwot Road when the collision occurs. Here's a picture of the accident aircraft 2117 Yankee, taken from a couple of years ago when it last sold, a 2004 Cessna Skyhawk SP. And looking at the panel, it's got some fairly late model avionics, which would include ADS-B out, and I assume ADS-B in as well. The Xenos B is a kit-built aircraft by Sonex and is a motor glider design with a butterfly or V-tail and semi-monocoque aluminum construction. Both aircraft came to a rest fairly close to each other on the 10,000 block of Niwot Road, somewhere right in here. As we look at the sectional chart, we can begin to get an idea of just how busy this airspace is. The accident occurred just south of Longmont here on Niwot Road and is just underneath the outside edge of the Denver Class B airspace. Now, when it comes to traffic collisions, we know that in the traffic pattern is your highest chance or probability of being involved in a midair collision, and I would argue that next to being in the traffic pattern, particularly at uncontrolled airports, the next highest most likely spot for midair or potential midair collisions is right around the edges of this Class B airspace. Class B airspace, as we've discussed before, is shaped like an inverted wedding cake and is there primarily to keep traffic separated, airliners versus general aviation aircraft. The airliners on the IFR flight plans are to remain within the Class B airspace, so they have positive radar contact and radar control the whole time they come in on the approach and landing. Just outside the corners of this Class B airspace, you're allowed to operate without having to talk to the air traffic controllers. In other words, you need a clearance in order to enter Class B airspace, but you can operate freely just outside the limits of Class B airspace. So a lot of pilots, a lot of VFR general aviation pilots spend a lot of their time just on the outside of this airspace. Another thing to note about Class B airspace is this 30 nautical mile ADS-B out and Mode C ring. You are required to have ADS-B out and Mode C anywhere within 30 nautical miles of the Class B airspace, whether you're inside the airspace or outside of the airspace. Right here is Platte Valley Air Park, where the Sonics departed from, an uncontrolled airport underneath the lateral limits of the Class B airspace. And over here is the tower-controlled Rocky Mountain Airport, where the 172 departed from. And here's the limits of their airspace shown in the dotted blue line. The accident occurred here south of Longmont, near two other uncontrolled or non-tower airport, if you will, near Niwot, Colorado. So this is a practice, apparently this is a practice area that the training schools from out of Rocky Mountain Airport like to use just to the north of the airport, and it sandwiches you below the Class B airspace. Well, right here you're got to stay at or below 10,000 feet. Over here, where the Sonics departed from, he's got to remain at or below 7,000 feet to remain clear of the airspace. Now, you can get VFR traffic advisories possibly from Denver Control, but they're very busy handling the Class B airspace, so it's more likely than not that you may be denied VFR flight following while operating just outside the limits of the Class B airspace. If the controllers are not that busy, they will gladly handle you as VFR traffic and give you that extra set of eyes for potential traffic conflicts. But often in training environments, they are operating on their own, see and avoid VFR. And this accident highlights the limits of see and avoid. You simply cannot see and avoid all the traffic all the time. There are simply too many blind spots in too many different types of aircraft. And in this situation where you have the Sonics droning along fairly straight and level, now that Sonics has good visibility because as the pilot's well ahead of the low wing, a typical low wing versus high wing situation is somewhat mitigated by this. But the Cessna 172 with its high wing configuration, if it's doing a right-hand turn towards the Sonics aircraft, he may very well not see that Sonics aircraft while completing that right-hand turn, and they could easily come together from one of the blind spots in the Cessna 172. Investigators will also be looking at the sun angle at 9 a.m. in the morning with the sun rising out of the east, and possibly the condition of the windscreen in the Cessna 172. When you go to cleaning your windshields, it's important to the plexiglass on the windshield. I like to clean the windshields using a vertical swiping motion instead of a swirling motion to try to avoid the swirls which will dig into the plexiglass over the years, limiting your visibility, especially at low sun angles. Also, too, the Sonics may have a bit of a blind spot ahead and below its nose, as it's got a relatively large panel and engine, of course, like any single engine aircraft, mounted right in front of the pilot. Now, when we're cruising VFR, even without any radar assistance from flight control, we fly VFR hemispheric altitudes, even an odd plus 500, depending on whether you're eastbound or westbound. But that altitude separation of 1,000 feet, depending on which direction you're going, only begins above 3,000 feet above the ground. These two aircraft are operating just 2,000 feet above the ground, remaining below the Class B airspace. No one aircraft design can survive a mid-air collision any better than any other aircraft design. The forces are simply too great. But when an eyewitness says the two airplanes came together and just crumpled up and fell vertically out of the sky, you know you've got a pretty accurate eyewitness report. Both the Sonics and the Cessna and the Luscombe are all semi-monocoque construction aircraft. Monocoque, single shell construction. Semi-monocoque because they have the longerons and the bulkheads in them. And the monocoque construction is a very strong and lightweight structure. However, when damaged or dented, that monocoque construction can fail very quickly in just a crumple sort of fashion. Other aircraft like the Aviat Husky and the Piper and the Super Cub series of aircraft are built with a 4130 chromoly welded fuselage, which is a bit stronger airframe style but a bit heavier, but is still not any better at handling a midair collision more than anything else. Midair collisions have been studied for years. We average anywhere from 10 to 15 midair collisions here in the US every year. This study here, using, I believe, simulated data, identified these areas in the United States, and of course it's where the busy airspace is, where the Class B airspace, right around the edges of the Class B airspace, and they've determined where some of these potentials are. And if we scroll down here to Denver, northeast and northeast, right here where this, here it is, where this accident occurred, sure enough, they identified some potential collision areas. Shown in purple are the collisions in level flight, ironically enough, and shown in green are collision potential areas due to parallel approaches, due to going into parallel runways at Rocky Mountain Metro Airport. So what can we do to mitigate the potential for midair collisions? Midair collisions can happen to any of us, any experience level. It scares the hell out of us. See and avoid, we got to realize the limitations of see and avoid. We've got to add all the different tools in the toolbox, including ADS-B in and using ForeFlight. And what I found very important, getting ForeFlight to sync with your headphones so that you get a audio warning through your headphones of a potential traffic conflict so that you can keep your head outside of the cockpit. The idea with TCAS in the airlines is that you get an audible warning first, then you look down at the TCAS, you find the target, identify the range and direction from the aircraft, and then get your head out of the cockpit and begin to look for that traffic. Now in TCAS in the airlines, they're very advanced, and that will give you also a resolution advisory. It'll tell you exactly how to fly the aircraft using just the instruments to avoid the traffic collision. In general aviation, I found most of the time with ForeFlight, if you get the traffic warning, you can easily find that aircraft and take the evasive action you need to avoid that aircraft without being heads down, buried in the cockpit in the glass panel. Thanks so much for your support of this channel, especially the folks over on Patreon that make this content possible. See you here.